And okay, so last class we were talking about the Rubin's causal model, right? And so the Rubin's causal model basically talks about these potential outcomes. I'll just go through the structure again so that we recall what we did in the last class, and then I'll talk about what where we stopped. So last time we were talking about selection bias. Okay, but before I go to selection bias, let's go through this again. So there is a unit I which we are interested in. That unit can be an individual, household, plot, whatever. Each unit I is assigned to either the treatment group or the control group. So I here denotes the unit and D denotes their status, okay, whether they are in the treatment group or the control group. So, and the objective of this exercise is to see whether this treatment that we are giving has any influence on their outcomes. Those outcomes are denoted by Y here. So YI is basically the observed outcome. So you gave treatment to these individuals, and then in some time period T star, you observe their outcomes. So YI denotes observed outcomes. But for each individual that we have, you can there can be two, you can define two potential outcomes. So this YI within bracket 1 and yi within bracket 0, these two denotes the potential outcome. So for each individual, irrespective of whether they are treated or controlled, you can define their potential outcome under treatment. So basically potential outcome yi bracket under treatment and potential outcome under control. So 0 is denoting control, 1 is denoting treatment. And these yi's with brackets are the potential outcomes. Okay, so for each individual I, there will be two potential outcomes. One potential outcome of that individual under treatment and potential outcome of that individual under control. Okay, so you can express observed outcome by I as a linear combination of these two potential outcomes. Okay, and so you can write it like this: yi1, so potential outcome under treatment times di plus potential outcome under control 1 minus di. Of course, we know that at one point of time only one will be observed, right? But you can write it like this. Okay, both these potential outcomes yi1 and yi0 will have a distribution. I mean, they will be different for different individuals. But we, if you would have observed these two for each individual, you could have seen the whole distribution of treatment effect. Treatment effect, how is treatment effect defined here? Treatment effect is defined as this difference. So difference in the potential outcome under treatment, potential outcome under treatment minus the potential outcome under control. So this is the treatment effect. Notice that it's defined for each individual. But these, we don't observe both of these for the same individual, right? We will observe only one of them. And so what we can calculate are the average treatment effects. We cannot calculate the treatment effect for each individual. Okay. So given that we have this information now, we have this structure. What is the average treatment effect? The average treatment effect is the average value, the expectation of yi, observed outcome yi, conditional on for the treated group. So conditional on di is equal to 1. So the average of outcomes for the treated group. So this expression is basically average outcome for the treated group. Okay. And then what is this expression? This expression is the average observed outcome for the control group. So average observed outcome for the treated group, average observed outcome for the control group, right? So this is the difference, and this difference we can express it as this. So notice that the left hand side of this expression, the expression is written in terms of the observed outcomes, what you observe. But we can express this expression in terms of the potential outcomes. So we can write this as yi, the potential outcome for average of the potential outcome under treatment for the treated group, because this is what you observe for the treated groups, the potential outcome under treatment for the treated group, average of that minus the average value of the potential outcome under control for the control group, right? So these two things, this is this, right? This is what you observe. So this expression is equal to this expression. Similarly, this expression is another way of writing this expression, right? Now, what I have done here is I have added and subtracted this expression. So I have added it and subtracted it. It cancels out. So this is equal to this, right? So this is the average value of the potential outcome under control for the treated group. So these two, notice these two are not observed. So the potential outcome under control for the treated group minus the average value of the potential outcome of control under the treated group. So both of them are the same. So this, again, this is added and subtracted, so this cancels out. Okay. So given that we have done this, this can be manipulated and written like this. Okay. So this expression in blue is what? It's average value of the potential outcome under treatment for the treated group minus the average value of the potential outcome under control for treated group. Okay. So basically what I have done is I've taken this object, this object here, right? So you have this expression in the expression in blue. Similarly, you can write this expression also, which is the average value of the potential outcome under control for the treated group. This is unobservable. Notice that this we don't observe, minus the average value of the potential outcome under control for the control group. This we observe. Okay. So this expression in blue, if you notice, if you pay some attention to this expression in blue, forget about everything else. What is it saying? It is actually saying that the treatment effect, forget about the red object for now, the treatment effect is nothing but the difference in the average outcome for the treated individuals under treatment and under control. Okay. And this is actually this blue object, this blue colored object that you see here is called the average treatment effect on the treated. So this blue object is called the average treatment effect on the treated, ATT. Okay. And why is it called average treatment effect on the treated? Because notice we are comparing, in both the cases, we are comparing the outcomes of the treated individuals only. Okay. So what you are saying is the true treatment effect or the average treatment effect on the treated would be the difference in the potential outcomes of the treated individuals. Right. And so that's why it's called, this expression is comparing only the treated individuals, right? So this is called the average treatment effect on the treated. Okay. And the red expression, this object is called the selection bias. Okay. So this is the selection bias, right? Notice here these two things are the same. So it's saying the average value of the potential outcome under control for the treated group minus the average value of the potential outcome under control for the control group. What it is saying is that if the behavior of, so we remember that we have given the treatment to some randomly selected people and the rest of the people are our control group. Okay. So what is it saying? What is this red object saying? It's saying that if suppose, think of this thought experiment. If suppose if suppose you could observe the potential outcomes for individuals who were treated, if suppose the individuals who were treated, you could observe their potential outcome when if they would not have been treated. Okay, will that be similar to the controls outcome? Right, so it's a it's sort of like a, you know, it's a, you are thinking of a it's a bit of a it may be a bit of a difficult thing to grasp what this means, but it's saying is the treatment group to really see whether this randomization that you have done and the assignment that you have done is actually independent of the outcomes here. Okay, what the condition that you have to satisfy is that if suppose the treated group was not treated, what would be their outcomes, and would those outcomes be on average same as the outcomes of the control group? If that is true, if that is the case, then you don't have selection bias. But the problem here is that we don't observe the outcomes, the potential outcomes for treated group when they were not treated. We don't know how can you observe that, right? That's unobservable. You can't see it. So this red object or the selection bias is you can't estimate it or you can't test for it. So you don't know. At least, of course, there are ways of thinking about selection bias and all those things and quantifying it. But under this structure, the selection bias is something which is unobservable, because this object is not observable. Okay, we don't observe this object. So that's important. And so this is known as the average treatment effect, and this is known as the selection bias. Okay, and why do we call it selection bias? Notice, if you have done the selection of treatment, or if you have selected your treated group randomly, okay, then these two objects will be same. This will be equal to this thing, right? Because the individuals that were treated are randomly selected. So on average, their potential outcomes under no treatment would be same as the potential outcome of the control group. So that's why it's called selection bias, because if there was, you know, like even a tiny bit of, you know, selection based on some criteria for these individuals, then this red object will not be zero. Okay. Only if it is purely random, the assignment of treatment was purely random, will this red object on average will be zero, right? Because it's randomly assigned. So we know under random assignment, there should be no difference in the treatment and control group based on, you know, their characteristics and all those things. So that's why it's called the selection bias. Okay. And of course, one can also appreciate the fact that in any kind of observational analysis, okay, or by observational I mean, suppose you already have some data available with you. It can be you know, some you know, like a NSS, National Sample Survey Organization, employment survey or consumption survey, and you are trying to compare whatever, and I will show you an example which uses an NSS survey. You are trying to compare the differences in educational qualifications of educational attainment of, let's say, Hindus versus non-Hindus or something like that. Then you can see why there would be selection bias would be a major problem, because Hindus and non-Hindus, the status, your religion is not randomly assigned, right? So and you know, like many things. So for example, we are looking at people, you know, individuals who attended some training program versus individuals who didn't attend that training program, and you're trying to compare whether that training program had any influence on their job market outcomes, let's say. For example, we are trying to compare where IGIDR, where like the suppose we have this hypothesis that students who study in IGIDR get better jobs than students who don't study in IGIDR. And what we do is we compare the job market outcomes of IGIDR students versus non-IGIDR students. So in that case, you can see, I mean, it's easy to see that there would be a strong selection bias. Students self-select to enter into IGIDR, right? It's not that who comes into IGIDR or who does not come into IGIDR is a random phenomenon, right? Students self-select. So in this object, in that case, this object will not be 0, right? So suppose if students who are in IGIDR, for example, let's say all of you, okay, suppose in a parallel universe, we could observe your job market outcomes if you would not have attended IGIDR. Okay, that is this object. Okay. And this object is the outcomes of students who don't attend IGIDR. So basically what I'm trying to say is, suppose if we could observe your outcomes if you would not have attended IGIDR, will those outcomes be same as the outcomes of individuals who actually don't attend IGIDR? So it may not be, because you all are different from others in terms of educational qualifications and a whole lot of things, observed factors as well as unobserved factors. Maybe you have higher ability, maybe you are some ability is something which we cannot observe, so maybe you are more able individuals who could clear the exams and the interviews and all those things. So the reason of going through this Rubin's causal model is to basically highlight the importance of selection bias and what is how to think about selection bias. Okay, I'm sure you would have heard of selection bias, but how do we think about it? Okay, how do we characterize it in a very simple formulation? This does that. This framework, Rubin's causal model, does it, and it makes it easier for you to think about whenever you are trying to identify a causal effect of anything. It helps you in thinking about what issues can arise, or what kind of selection bias can you face in your exercise. So this, in that sense, this is very important. And when we will move on to reading papers, you will quite often see people talking about these things. Okay, they will talk about the ATT, the average treatment effect on the treated, and they will talk about selection bias. Okay. So randomization and selection bias. So this is quite intuitive to understand, given that you have understood the idea of selection bias and ATT. So if the assignment of treatment is purely random, okay, purely random means that the assignment was not influenced by anything. Okay, it was done in a purely random fashion. In that case, as I've already said, these two objects will be the same. Suppose if we could randomly assign students to attend IGIDR, suppose we could select a group, and within that group we could randomly select some people who will attend IGIDR and keep the rest don't attend IGIDR, and then we compare their job market outcomes. In that scenario, these two objects, the two objects in the selection bias term, these two would be the same, right? And therefore the selection bias would be 0, right? This object would be 0, and in that case you can see that the ATT or the ATT would be the ATE. ATE is the average treatment effect. So actually, the average treatment effect is a very simple thing. So the average treatment effect is the difference in the averages of the observed outcomes of the treated group and the control group. Okay, so simple, very simple. If you have truly been able to conduct a randomized experiment, if you could do that truly, then to know the causal effect, the only thing that you have to do is to calculate the average of the outcomes of the treated group and the average of the outcomes of the control group, and the difference between those two would give you the treatment effect. Simple, okay? But only when you have only when you achieve true randomization. Okay? And under that, if you are able to do that, then we know that the treatment status DI is independent of potential outcomes by design, because by design it's random, uninfluenced by anything. So in principle, random assignment of treatment eliminates selection bias. So now we understand, hopefully, why an RCT or a randomized controlled trial is considered to be like a gold standard for causal analysis. It's because of this idea that if things are done randomly, if the assignment of the treatment is done randomly, then a simple difference in averages would identify the treatment effect, where we will have no selection bias. This would be zero. Okay. Any questions?
Sir, hello. Sir, can you again explain ATT? Like with the example of IGIDR.
You want to? Sorry, I didn't hear. What?
Can you again explain ATT, average, with the help of the example that you gave?
Okay. So suppose, let's say, and this is a very common question in labor economics. People in labor economics generally ask these kind of questions, and in particular this question. The question, and so let's say, suppose we want to see how a college degree or a master's degree affects the students' job market outcomes. Okay, does a college degree, a master's degree, help in student getting a better job? Right, so that's the question. So let's say that we like, for example, you all are now placed. Okay, so we collect data on your job market outcomes. Okay. What jobs did you get? Okay, whether you got a job or whether you didn't get a job. Although most of you have a job now, but let's say that we collect this data. Whether did you get a job? Whether you get a job, 1, otherwise 0. Okay. Similarly, people who didn't attend IGIDR, students who, let's say, didn't go for a master's degree, we collect their data also, whether they have a job or whether they don't have a job. Now, we want to see whether a master's degree helps you in getting a job or not, right? Or a master's degree from IGIDR helps you in getting a job or not. So a simple exercise that you can do is you can find the average, the proportion of individual in the treated group. In this case, the treated group is students from IGIDR. The the proportion of people who got a job from the treated group, and we can calculate the proportion of people who got a job from the non-treated group, or students who didn't go to IGIDR. And we can compare that difference, compare those two proportions. Okay, and the difference sort of in a, if I don't know about all these things, if I'm oblivious to this idea of selection bias, I may end up saying that, okay, let's say 72% of students from IGIDR have a job, versus 50% of the students who didn't attend IGIDR, people from outside, have a job. So I may say 50 minus 72, how much would that be? 22%. Okay, so that's the treatment effect. Okay, I may say going to IGIDR increases your likelihood of getting a job by 0.22, right? So, but is that simple comparison a right thing to do? Can you interpret that as causal? Can you interpret that as the effect of IGIDR?
No, sir.
No. Why can't you?
So because there is selection process, right? We are.
Exactly. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, basically, I wanted to explain that point, selection process. So, yeah.
So so because students self-selected into getting into IGIDR, okay, and since they self-select, it's possible, very well possible, that these students who are in IGIDR may be very different from students who didn't end up in IGIDR. And you don't know whether the difference in their averages is driven by the IGIDR effect or is driven by their differences in other things. Okay, in terms of how much are they, how educated they are, what kind of families they come from, and all those things. Many things you can observe. For example, we can observe your educational outcomes. We can observe how much you have studied, where you have studied from, all those things. But many things we cannot observe. For example, it's possible that students who end up in IGIDR have higher ability than students who don't end up in IGIDR. But how do you measure ability? Right? Ability is something which is unobservable. So selection may be on observable factors, and selection may also be on unobservable factors which an econometrician, a statistician cannot observe. Selection on observables we can solve because we can control for those things, right? Selection on unobservables is unsolvable. We cannot solve, we cannot do anything about it because we don't observe. Ability we don't observe. So in that sense, the problem of selection bias always remains. Okay, coming back to ATT.
So,
Yeah.
So I had a question in selection bias. This
Yes.
first term of selection bias, expectation of people who were not treated given the treatment was given. This seems
Right.
logically inconsistent.
In what sense?
Expectation yi0 given that di is equal to 1. Outcome of the non-treated group given the treatment was given.
Right.
How do you measure this? Outcome
That's
of the
what.
non-treated group given the treatment was given.
Exactly. It is. You don't. It's a theoretical idea. It's not. It's not calculable. Okay. It is, of course, that's what I said. In a parallel universe, suppose we could. Suppose we had a way of observing the treated group's outcome under control. Okay, the treated group's outcome if they were not given the treatment. Then this would be the selection bias. Of course, it's in real world you will never observe this object, okay? And that's why it's unobservable. Selection bias is always unobservable, and that's why, going back to, remember we talked about this fundamental problem of causal inference. In fact, this is the fundamental problem of causal inference. The challenge in causal inference is that we can never observe both yi1 and yi0 for any unit I. We only observe one. Okay, and they, in fact, they have a term for it, which is this fundamental problem of causal inference. So you are right. It's not. It is. It's not logic. It's not logically inconsistent, but it is. It's real in real world. It, of course, you will never observe this. It has been done this way to conceptually separate the treatment part of it, the treatment effect part of it, from the part which is due to selection. And I will take this to, when I show you this thing in a regression, you will understand what this object is actually. Okay, so there I think it would make things easier to understand.
Thank you, sir.
Sir?
Yeah.
So just continuing with the example that you gave of job market, and if they are randomly assigned students who are in IGIDR and not in IGIDR, But there are other external factors which might affect a job outcome,
Right, for
which is
example.
not pertaining to say selection bias, like apart from the selection bias. So how does one account for that? Because in an ideal scenario, if it's random, the selection bias should be zero.
Right.
But that might not be the case due to some certain exogenous factors.
Yes. Now I'm coming to that. Okay. Right now we have not talked about regressions at all. We have not talked about observables and all those things that you are talking about. In this world, as of now, we just are comparing averages. Okay. But I will come to how do we account for these other factors which may also influence this.
Okay.
So now, why did we go through this Rubin's causal model? I mean, what is the reason for us to talk about this structure? The reason is this. Okay, the reason is for us to basically characterize selection in a regression framework. Okay, how we generally run regressions, we don't compare averages. But how do we think of this causal, the ATT and the ATE in a regression framework? And how do we characterize the selection bias in a regression framework? So consider this very simple regression equation, okay, where yi again is the observed outcome and di is the treatment status as before we defined, okay? And you can write a regression like this, an intercept term, slope coefficient, delta, and the error term. And we know, we know what this delta will give you, right? What will this delta give you? Anybody? So what is this alpha? Suppose you run this regression. Okay, let's take the example of
Average effect of non-treated group is alpha. Delta is average effect of treated group.
Right. But in even simpler terms, this would be if DI is giving you the control and treatment status, alpha would be the average of outcomes for the control group, and delta would give you the difference between the average outcomes of the controlled and treated group, right? DI is equal to 1, right? So it's easy to interpret this regression. So if you add alpha plus delta, you get the average outcomes for the treated group, and alpha is the average outcome for the control group. So now let's go through this this algebra. It's not very complicated. It's very simple. So expected if you find what is the average outcome for the treated group in this regression. So you can write it like this: expected value of yi condition on di is equal to 1 is alpha plus delta di1 delta plus the expected value of the errors, the residual that is left conditional on di is equal to 1. Similarly, what would be the average value of the control group? You can write it like this: expected value of yi conditional on di is equal to 0 is just alpha, right? This is 0, and this is, and then you have expectation of residual term conditional on di is equal to 0. And then within this framework, we can, again write the average expression for the average treatment effect with observed outcome. So it is basically this object minus this object. So we do that, and alpha gets cancelled. We have delta here, delta plus this. Okay, we have this object, and this is basically this minus this, right? Now this red object is the selection bias. Okay. Here in this case with regressions, this red object is the selection bias, and this red object is exactly equal to what we saw in the previous slide. So this, right, under this very simple framework, this object is this. So we understand now what is going in this error term, or what is this error term. Okay, it's basically, this error term is basically this, the potential outcome. Okay, and we know that we don't observe this. right? So this your when you run a regression like this to calculate the treatment effect or estimate the causal effect, the selection bias term basically is in the error terms. The selection bias is in the error term, the residual, what you could not control for, right? So with observational data, if you have outcomes, you're looking at some outcomes for some treatment with observational data, the problem is that whatever is uncontrolled for, or whatever is the residual will drive your selection bias. Okay, and this selection bias in this very simple example is this object basically, and the reason why and what you can't do much about selection bias, at least in this very simple framework, because we know this is not observed. Okay, this is not observed, so we can't compare the behavior of individuals of we don't observe the potential outcome under control for the treated individuals. We don't observe this, so we can't what do we do about this and of course here I'm just relating this regression to the expression of selection bias from the Rubin's causal model, but I will later on interpret this problem in terms of the omitted variable bias. Okay, and there hopefully we will understand how does this selection bias in potential outcomes actually interprets into an econometric issue. Okay, and that we have seen, right, that object, that issue, that kind of bias, selection bias or specification bias, omitted variable bias, we are more familiar with, but that essentially captures this. Okay, so selection, what does selection bias boils down to in a regression? Selection bias boils down to the correlation between the regression error, the epsilon, and the regressor or the treatment here. And so if these two are correlated, the error, residual, and the treatment, then we have selection bias. Okay, and under the conditional independence assumption. So this is an assumption we make when we say that our regression identifies the true treatment effect. Okay, this delta, we have to make an assumption because we cannot be 100% sure unless we do a RCT that it is conditionally independent, or the selection is on observable. So this xi beta here has other observable factors, right? So in case of, for example, comparing IGIDEA students' job market outcomes versus other students, we know that these students are different on other outcomes, schooling, background, this, that, incomes, all those things. So what we are saying is that if in this regression I put all of those variables as controls, the observed variables, then that controls for all, all the differences that these individuals have. And once I control for these factors, the assignment of treatment between these two group of students is as good as random. So that kind of assumption is called the conditional independence assumption, or we also call it selection on observables. So selection of observables means that's the selection that was done, or the process through which student ended up in IGIDEA and student didn't end up in IGIDEAs were entirely driven by what we observe, the observed characteristics of these people, and ability had no role to play, which is unobservable. So and you in the Rubin's causal model framework, you can write this assumption like this. So you are saying the potential outcome for each individual I, the potential outcome under treatment and under control is independent of the treatment status DI. Why is this? Is independent of the treatment status DI conditional on the control variables in this vector x. So those can be other things. Okay. So this regression controls for those other factors which we observe, right? So let's.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, what is that inverted pi term called?
So that this symbol is basically, it's saying that it is independent of. So this is basically denoting these two terms are independent of di, conditional on x. So the inverted pi is saying independent of, orthogonal to, basically. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's, to make these ideas, concrete, to crystallize these ideas into a real example. Let's work through this example that I have here. Okay. So let's say that we have these. So this, by the way, this example that I worked out is from the National Sample Survey Situation Assessment, National Sample Survey Organization Situation Assessment Survey for 2011. And this situation assessment survey was done on farmers. Okay, so this data is mainly for farms in India, agricultural farms, right? So the data collect variety of information for these farmers, like what crops they grow, how much income do they earn from these crops, who do they sell to, what kind of inputs do they use, what kind of activities they do, what kind of jobs do they do, all those kind of things. Okay, so how educated these individuals are, all those things. And it's an observational data, and it's a cross section where the unit of analysis is a household, right? So I here is a household. So let's say, and so generally the government of India organizes so there is an Indian Council for Agricultural Research. Okay, there is this body which is responsible for conducting research on all aspects of agriculture, be it technology, be it equipment, fertilizer, pesticide, all those things. So the Indian Council of Agricultural Research has these, so they are present in almost all states of the country. And they have something called this extension program, okay, where the extension program, the objective of the extension program is of the ICAR, Indian Council of Agricultural Research, is to basically tell farmers about new technologies that are available, new agricultural technologies, new ways of cultivating, new kinds of crops, new seeds, and all those things. So all these activities which the ICR does to inform farmers about new technologies, new advances in agriculture comes under extension. We call that agricultural extension. So extending the research activities to the farmers. And the extension, these extension agents, they are called extension agents, who go to the fields and tell farmers about these things, who interact with the farmers. They generally, on a regular basis, do training programs. They organize farmer training programs. So they will train farmers on some new technique, okay, new way of cultivating, new way of harvesting. So they conduct these training programs for farmers. And the objective of these training programs is to basically introduce farmers to new ways and methods of cultivating. And the ultimate objective of all these exercises is to increase farm productivity, right? To increase farmers' productivity. Why would you like to introduce farmers to new technology? Why would you like to introduce them to new ways of doing things? The reason is we want to increase their agricultural productivity, right? Because as you would know, agricultural productivity in India is quite low, right? And a whole lot of individuals are employed in agriculture. So that is a big issue, a big problem. So so this data that we have also collects information on whether these farm household attended any training programs, these kind of training programs or not. So our question is very simple. Okay. Our question is, does attending these training programs organized by these extension agents and by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research or any person, it can also be a private NGO or like cooperating with who work with farmers. Does these kind of training programs actually help farmers in terms of increasing their per capita agricultural income, right? So per person agricultural income, does that influence that at all? So in terms of the Rubin's causal model, the Rubin structure that we had, the unit is I, household, a farm household. The treatment DI is 1 if the farm household says that they attended a training program, 0 if the farm household says they didn't attend a training program. Okay. The outcome by I, the observed outcome by I, is the annual per capita agricultural income, right, of the household. So we have all the 3 things that we need. The treatment, we know in this particular question, the question that we are looking at, the treatment is whether they attended a training program, 1, they didn't attend a training program, 0. And the outcome is per capita agricultural income. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do here. And are we recording? Yes, we are.
Yes, sir, I started the recording.
Thank you so much. I generally forget about recording, so good that you people remember. Okay, so let's write a very simple empirical model to estimate the causal effect. Another thing, just a digression. Another thing I would like you people to learn from this course, or in general from all econometrics courses, is how do you write an empirical model, right? So for example, you have any whatever question you have in your mind, empirical question, you should know how to write a empirical model for that question, right? So that's something I think which is very important for whether you want to do research or whether you want to be in the private sector. It's as long as you are doing empirical work, econometrics, or working with data, it's very important for us to know how to write an idea, a question that you may have in your mind into an empirical model. Okay, like for example, in your theory courses, you would be writing, your idea into a theoretical model and then solving it and all those things. Similarly, in applied econometrics, it is critical that you know how to correctly write your idea into an empirical model. So that is something which I will. I want you all to get from this course. That is very important. Okay. So given the very simple example that we're working with here, we can write a very simple regression. And the outcome is nothing but the per capita agricultural income for household I, right? And the treatment DI is training, whether they attended training, whether they didn't attended training or not attended training. So that's the treatment. Okay. Training is the treatment dummy. So this regression here, we don't have controls. If this is without controls, you can write another regression where you can add a vector xi which has a bunch of controls. So you can control for things like whether these households, what other things like family size and their educational qualifications, religion, caste, whether they do other activities or not, whether they do do they just do agriculture or they also do livestock rearing, and all those things. So variety of whatever observed variables you have in your data can be added in this control vector X, right? So you can run these two regressions. You can have one like this without controls. You can have one with controls. And if you are assuming that with this regression is, if you run this regression and if you say that delta is the causal effect of training on agricultural income, then what you are assuming is that training was done randomly to farm households. Okay, some randomly farm households were selected and they were given training, the rest were not given training. And in that case, this delta would give you the true treatment effect. But that is not true in our case because ours is an observational data. So you will run a regression like this where you will have a bunch of controls, and with this regression, if you say that delta is the treatment effect, what you are essentially saying is that the training program is independent of the treatment assignment was independent of the outcomes, conditional on all these controls that you have in X. So you are assuming you are basically making the conditional independence assumption here. Keep conditional on these control variables, and the assignment of training was as good as random. Okay. So that's what is written over here. Okay. So so this figure is showing you the outcome. So this is the density. I'm just plotting the density of the outcomes for the treated group. So households who attended the training program, and the density of outcomes for the households who didn't attend training program. So it's just the density plot of these individuals. And notice that the density, and so what is this density about? This is density of per capita agricultural income. Notice that these densities are not very similar. The red one, people who didn't attend training program, their density peaks here. Okay. And so people who attended training program, their density peaks, and so this has a higher peak at a lower value. Okay, if I suppose I could draw a line, like the maximum of this curve, and then so the central tendency of this density would be somewhere around here, right? Although it's a skewed distribution, so you never know, but let's say that it's around here. The central tendency of this distribution is around here. You can see that the averages may differ quite a bit from this density itself, right? So so we have a whole distribution of outcomes, right? Although these individuals are different. The people who attended training program are different from people who didn't attend training program. But we see that both of those groups, the treated and the control group, have a whole density of outcomes, right? So, so now here are the results from those regressions that I just showed you. Okay, so remember that the outcome is the per capita agricultural income, and we are interested in the delta, which is basically the coefficient on the training dummy, right? So forget about 2, 3, like column 2, column 3, column 4, and 5 for now. Focus on column 1. So this is the delta, the coefficient on the training dummy, and the outcome here is per capita agricultural income. This is the intercept, right? The constant or the alpha. So what is it saying? So forget about 2, 3, 4, 5. So can any one of you explain what this constant is and what this term is in specification 1? Anybody would volunteer to explain?
The average difference in productivity of people who attended training and who did not attend training is 1079.6.
Yes.
with
Right.
standard error of 167.
Right. And what is this term?
This is the productivity of people who did not attend the training program.
Yes. Right. Right. So exactly. So this is basically what it's saying is that on average, people who didn't attend training program, their agricultural income per capita is rupees 4,628. Right. And the differences in average per capita income of individuals who attended training program and individuals who didn't attend the training program is around 1,000 rupees, 1,079 rupees, right? So if you want to know the average per capita income for the individuals who attended training program, you can add this term with this term and you will get the average for that group. And of course it's positive, so this coefficient is positive. So what it is saying is that on average, people who attend training program have around 1,000 rupees higher agricultural income that people who didn't attend training program. So there is a difference in their averages, and it is statistically significant, right? So this is what this says, specification 1. And now these are some observed variables. Okay, so these variables go into that control vector xi. So for example, you can control for how much land do they have, these farm households, what, operated area, how much land they have in hectares. And then you can also control for the household head's education, how educated the head is. So basically, and you can also control for the average educational level of all the individuals. But here in this case, I'm just focusing on the head's education. And then you can control for irrigation. So what proportion of their irrigated area, what proportion of area that they cropped is irrigated, and we are controlling for household size. So like 3-4 observed variables. And so what I'm doing here is in specification 2, column 2, I'm adding to this regression a control, which is operated area in hectares. Okay, so I'm adding this as controls. In specification 3, I'm adding heads education as control along with operated area. In specification 4, I'm adding crop irrigated area as control along with these two. And in the fifth one, I'm adding all of 4. Okay. So yeah, so you can see that operated area, higher operated area has a positive influence on agricultural income, right? It's a positive and statistically significant effect. Heads education also has a positive effect. Crop irrigated area, irrigation also has a positive effect. Family size has a negative effect, right? Higher, if you have more land, your agricultural income is higher. If you are more educated, your agricultural income is higher. If you have more irrigation, your agricultural income is higher. If you have a bigger family, your agricultural income is lower.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, although all these variables are statistically significant at 99%,
Yes.
we are getting R square to be very low. In
Yes.
first model, we are getting it 0, and in the rest of the model. So can we conclude based on this R square, whatever conclusion that you have made?
See, in generally when in this literature, the impact evaluation literature, or whenever you are interested in estimating the causal effect, the convention in this literature is to not bother about R squares too much. Okay, the reason is this: R squares can also be higher if there is a whole lot of measurement error in agricultural income, right? So agricultural, if your Y has a lot of measurement error, then R squares will automatically be lower, because your measurement error cannot be explained by anything. It's a measurement error, right? Measurement error in the classical sense. I mean, you have heard of classical measurement error, right? You know what classical measurement error is?
Sir, is it about bookkeeping and all? Like,
No, have you heard of this term called
no,
classical?
sir. No, sir.
So basically, uh, um, how should I explain this? So classical measurement error is an error which is random. Okay. So let's say here in this case, our outcome is agricultural income. Okay. So it's generally, I mean, you can imagine when you talk to people about their incomes, they will, I mean, the errors in measuring incomes would be very high because people generally will not be very forthcoming in reporting their true incomes, right? So the way these surveys collect income data is they would ask income questions very indirectly. Okay, how many cattle do you have? How many crops you grow, and these kind of things. And then they would, using prices for these things, average prices and all those things, they implicitly, using those prices and the quantities, they would calculate their income. But those estimates would have a lot of measurement error because the way measurement was done. Okay, we don't have a perfect way of. So, for example, when we are collecting data for whether IGIDR students got a job or whether IGIDR students didn't get a job, that will not have a measurement error because you see whether that person has a job or whether a person does not have a job. In this case, when you have incomes, you don't observe people's income, especially agricultural income is not observable, right? So you measure incomes very indirectly, and because you measure income indirectly, it may or may not be equal to the true income of that household. And so that difference between the true income of that household and what the survey captured is called the error in measuring that particular outcome. A classical measurement error is, you call that error classical in econometrics when that difference between the true income and the measured income, that difference is random, meaning that error in measurement was random across people. It's not that some group of people strategically gave the wrong information and others didn't. It's just that, like the likelihood of error itself was random and is independent of other observable factors of that household. In that case, we called measurement error classical. So when we have classical measurement error, that means all of that it is unexplained by design because it's errors in measuring true income. And since it is unexplained, it will all go into the residual, right? And because it is all in the residual, it would be reflected in your R squares. And so in general, in such scenarios, R squares may not be high. That's one reason why we don't emphasize too much on R squares in this literature when we are looking at causal effects. Second, it's especially in this particular example that I'm showing you, you can imagine what kinds of things would be a whole lot of things would be determining whether a farmer attends training program or didn't attend training program. I here have only 4 control variables, right? So only 4 control variables cannot explain a lot of variation in agricultural income, which is such a general catch-all outcome. And these individuals are spread across the whole country. Okay, so this survey was done on 40,000 farm households across India. So we have farmers from Punjab, we have farmers from Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, covers the whole country. And these farm households are very different. The conditions are very different. Environment, endowments, geography, everything is different. So of course, it's not a surprise to me that all these 4 or 5 variables are not explaining much of the variation in the agricultural incomes. So that's that's the thing. Okay. But
Sir,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
Sir,
yeah.
one more thing. So
Yeah.
the people selected for the training program, they are randomly selected, right?
No. They are not. You just ask farmer that household whether did you attend a training program or didn't you? They say yes or no. That's it. It's observational. The data is observational.
Yes.
So what I want you to actually observe here is observe the movement in this coefficient across these 5 specifications. Okay, observe what is happening to the delta when we add these control variables. Do you see something peculiar happening?
The difference is falling.
Yes, right. And what I do in the next slide is I plot this coefficient across these 5 specifications. Okay, and so here are those deltas for those 5 specifications, and notice the decline in the difference between people who attended training program and people who didn't attend training program as you add other observed variables, right? Variables which were observed. And why could this be? Can anybody explain why is this happening?
So there might be a reason that these exogenous factors might also be involved in the difference, like training program. That difference is capturing the effect of these exogenous variables as well.
Right. So can somebody interpret this in terms of in the language that we, the terminology that we used in the Rubin's causal model? Can you attempt to do that? Just to try to connect some dots between this and that. So suppose, let's say, suppose this figure was like this. Suppose across these 5 specifications, all these bars were of the same height. Like this. This was a flat line like this. What could you say then?
There was no selection bias.
Yeah, right. So in terms of the assignment, of the treatment, what can you say?
That they were chosen randomly. I mean,
As good as yeah. Go ahead. As good as random, right? The assignment was as good as random. I mean, no way of testing that, but you will have more confidence in saying something like this if you observe this. In this particular case, you are seeing a pattern. You are seeing that as you add more terms, the delta goes down. Okay, so here it's quite clear from this picture and those regressions that the assignment of treatment was not random. For sure, it was not random, right? And the other thing which one of you pointed out was that what is the problem here? If suppose the assignment of treatment was not random, the problem is that if we ignore that aspect, then we are estimating, and if we call that delta the treatment effect, it's not right. It's not giving me the treatment effect. It is the true treatment effect plus the selection bias, right? So delta in specification 1 is some small proportion of it is the true treatment effect, but the rest may very well be driven by selection bias. Okay, and that selection bias may be on observables as you see in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it may also be on unobservables which we cannot control for in these regressions. So that's the key idea. In this example, and that's the main problem in this literature. Okay, this example basically outlines the main issue in causal analysis. It's this, that we don't know the delta that we are estimating. We don't know what proportion of that delta is true treatment effect and what proportion is selection bias. We have ways of getting around it. We have ways of handling selection bias, but in And in a true sense, it's not, we don't know. Okay. So hence, since we don't know, people use variety of ways of getting around this problem. And they would use different kinds of empirical models or different kinds of situations and things to convince the reader that what they are showing you is the true treatment effect. And the papers that we have, all of those papers basically try to do that. Okay. So so that's the thing. We can formalize this. I mean, what we observe in this example can also be formalized econometrically. And it's basically, I mean, selection bias can also be interpreted as omitted variable bias, right? I think I should stop. I should not rush into this because this is important. I will stop and I will, if you have questions, you can ask questions. If you have, yeah.
So can we go to, it's a silly question. Can we go to slide 13?
No
So-
questions. Any question?
So it's just about notation. So here in the, so the one below. So when we write the regression model,
Right.
we generally have the coefficient first and the, like the exogenous variables later. So here we have xi beta. Is there a specific reason we do denote it this way?
It's just, I mean, like I do it this way because I am writing it in a vector form. So
Yes,
basically,
sir.
this xi is a vector and beta is also a vector.
Yes,
So
sir.
so that's why I'm writing it this way. So it's beta I times xi times beta. So xi would have x1, x2, x3, x4. Beta would have beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, beta 4. It's
Yes,
basically
sir.
a product. So you can write it like that also. I mean, you can write it like beta 1, x1, beta 2, x2, beta 3, xt. But when you have a whole lot of control variables, that becomes inconvenient. So I write it
Okay.
in vector form. But in the papers that you may see people writing it this way also. Okay, so some may write it explicitly, but most of them will, just to save space, write it in this form. But it essentially means that, you know, x1, beta 1, x2, beta 1, x1, beta 2, x2, and so on.
Sir, it
Okay,
has
sir.
to be x beta only, no? Because x is k cross n matrix and beta is n cross 1. So to be multiplication to be defined, it has to be x beta. N is the number of observation, k is number of betas.
So I didn't get it. So what are you
No,
saying?
I'm saying that for matrix multiplication to be defined,
Acha,
since x is k
right,
cross n matrix and
right, yeah,
beta is n cross 1.
yeah, yes. Anything else?
So along with the magnitude, there is also a decrease in the level of significance as we add
Yes.
other control
Yes,
variables.
exactly. Yes, right.
So
Yes.
is the reason is again because we are now accounting
See,
that there is
what is T statistic? What is your T stat? Your T stat is the beta by standard error, isn't it? If your hypothesis is that
yes,
you know
sir.
that zero or not, it's essentially this coefficient divided by the standard error,
Standard. Yes,
right?
sir.
The coefficient size is going down, right?
Yes, sir.
The standard error is almost the same. I mean, like it fluctuates, but if you look at, I mean, it's 60.167 here. It's 158, 157, 163. Not much change. So basically, the significance level is going down because the variance of that estimate remains more or less comparable across classifications, but the beta, the numerator is approaching zero, right? So so that's why you see a decline in significance.
Okay, sir.
But this is a very just a second. This is a worrying trend because if you could draw this line, you know, like asymptotically, it would just approach zero, right? At some point, it may be parallel, very close to zero. So what this is saying is that there is no difference. There may be no difference between these two groups. Yes. Anything else?
So can you explain the last line of the slide 10?
This one, which one is? I have not numbered it. Where are you seeing these numbers?
Page number 10.
So, page number 10.
Yeah.
This one. This one, right?
Wait a minute.
You want me to explain this?
I think it's the one before it.
This one.
Yeah, this one.
Okay. So, sorry.
The last line.
Yeah. So this is basically what I'm saying here is that, you calculate these two differences. You calculate the average treatment effect. It is delta plus this term. Okay. This term is exactly equal to these two terms that we saw in the Rubin's causal model. So this expectation of the residual conditional on D1 is this term. It's basically the potential outcome for the treated group, the average of the potential outcome under control. Similarly, this is the potential for the control group, the potential outcome under control. Okay, so it's basically saying that if you do this and if you do these, find these two expectation, this difference, of course all of these are errors are, residuals are in a regression, residuals are a black box. We don't know what goes into it, but conceptually what this means is that the error terms have these two this potential outcome. Okay, and the reason why you have selection bias, you may have selection bias here, is that we don't observe this potential outcome. Okay, so and this, if selection was not random, assignment of treatment was not random, then we know these two terms will not be zero. Okay, so we will not be able to identify the delta. Okay, so that's what it means in this simple structure. Of course, that does not mean, if these two are equal, does not mean that the regression does not have an error term. I mean, there would be an error term here, which would be the statistical variation in yi and di, but this just relates the error term in the regression to the potential outcomes in the treatment, in the Rubin's causal model. So in this kind of a regression where you have control variables, this is more complicated. Okay, you cannot directly relate the error terms here to what you have here, this kind of a structure, because then it has to be conditional on observed variable also. But what the key thing that we have to remember from this structure is about, the main message from this story is that when we are comparing in this literature, and when you are estimating causal effects, you will generally be comparing two groups. Okay, so what you have to keep in when you are running regressions like these, what you have to keep in mind is that the error terms is catching the unobserved potential outcomes. Okay, and then you have to think about what factors may influence those unobserved potential outcomes, and then you have to either control for those factors in your regression, or think about a way of getting around those factors. So that is what this structure should that's where you should use this structure for. So later on, when we move on to some papers, we will talk about these things, and we will very carefully go through the kind of comparisons that we are doing. And this another important use of this structure is when we will talk about fixed effects. Okay, so one very important thing that we use in applied microeconomics or applied econometrics is fixed effects. So fixed effects are used quite often in these kind of studies, and we have fixed effects of variety, like different orders. So you would have individual fixed effects for individual, fixed effects for time periods, fixed effects for state cross time. So variety of fixed effects. This kind of a structure that you see here will also help us in understanding what is happening when we have these dummy variables or fixed effects in our regression. So that is where this will come into use. Okay. So I want to so next class, when by the way, I didn't receive any email from any of you. So you want next class tomorrow? Yeah.
So the official change has been approved by the student's office that the class can be shifted to Wednesday 11:30 a.m.
Okay. Okay. So tomorrow 11:30 then.
Yes, sir. So now the class timings are Tuesday 9:30 a.m. and Wednesday 11:30 a.m.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. And then the PhD students, please write to me in case anybody has a connectivity issue or anything. They think that in future they they expect that in future they will have issues connecting with their group members. Write to me. I will arrange them into groups accordingly. Okay. So I will MSc students, I can tell you, I will do it on my website. I'll assign your group numbers, and I will maybe not by next class, but next week you will know your group numbers. PhD batch, let's see. I mean, depending on what how people respond. Okay. So that's it. Let's continue this tomorrow. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.